expand the vast unknown, and this new life is cast. All right, so we're live on BWB. Hello, we're probably also live in the Infinite Playa right now. Some people are probably watching in their little avatars of a screen on a screen, kind of watching Burning Man play out around them. So I would love to start today's kind of chat is we called it "Oh, the Places We'll Go." I think I was a bit inspired by our friend Teddy Saunders built a film years and years ago, probably a decade ago at this point, called "Oh, the Places You'll Go at Burning Man." And it was a really beautiful, it was one of the most popular pieces of media. And I always was inspired by how people shared that Dr. Seuss kind of narrative for the culture of Burning Man. And it also got me thinking about where are we actually going? And today is really about that look into the future and how Burning Man culture moves into the world. And so I would love to start out though by just taking a moment to ask you guys. So it's 2 p.m., 2:15 p.m. on Wednesday Pacific time in the middle of Burning Man week. Roxy, what would you be doing right now? And what would you be paying attention to?
Well, I would have likely been at Burning Man 5 days at minimum, generally probably about a week. At this point, camp would be set up. If I was helping with an art project, it would be pretty dialed. And it would be about that time to start to wander with less clocks, less of an agenda, and less of a goal. And I, at this point in my burn, generally put away any schedules and let myself be followed by my intuition. I would start to just pay attention to what my deepest presence was guiding me towards, and little nuances in conversations and flickers of wonder that are happening around me. And I would just be wandering off into the distance, as it were, or sinking into some sort of long conversation. But part of the beauty of this time of year and this pilgrimage, which I've been really feeling the sadness of not being in the physical space of this time around. It's a solace and a gift to kind of be in the space of timelessness and lack of agenda and deep presence. So I would be really sinking into that right about now.
Damian?
Yeah, for me, I would be in practice of flow. Generally, for me, Burning Man is a place, we live in a world where we're always doing. It's always this to do, that to do, this place to go, this person to meet, always doing. Burning Man for me is a place of not doing. So I'm usually in practice of being present. To Roxy's point, similarly, I'm very in deep presence and moving through the space and allowing it to take me where I need to go, be where I need to be, have the conversations I need to have. And ultimately that practice of flow and presence is sort of like what charges me, re-energizes me, and allows me to actually bring that back into the daily life, the everyday of doing, where I can be in better relationship with presence and better relationship with flow state. So that's what I would be doing at Burning Man: practice flow, practice presence.
And I think being as well. Less doing, more being.
A lot of being, a lot less doing. And so I'm also grateful for all the creators and the artists who are doing and creating at Burning Man and creating a container for me to just be. So I'm very much in deep gratitude to that, and very much miss it for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about being in that state, And I think in our work and where it's overlapped over the years, we've always come back to that kind of particular area of design that we really care about, which we refer to as ontological design. And so ontology is the study of being. And so when we look at the process of design that maybe was more of an emergent process at Burning Man, but somehow culturally came into effect through that emergent process, we can see that parts of that culture are taken out into the world, and a representation of that culture that people feel are taken out into the world and represented in other places. And I would love to explore what it means to really be focused on that process of looking at our ontology, looking at ontological design, and how do we look at the things that are happening around the world right now, and the complexities and the really dynamic and challenging situations that we face. How do we look at the process of shifting our behaviors back towards something that can help maybe scale parts of this culture that we have kind of somehow limited to maybe a week or two of the year?
Well, in terms of, I think we're in a very interesting and unique time, because right now we're doing Burning Man in the virtual, and the opportunity here with what's happening is that we can actually introduce Burning Man culture to a much larger audience, and we can scale those behaviors that we actually get to practice every year in the physical. The question becomes like, how can we show up in the virtual as burners and embody these value sets, these principle sets that we've been practicing for 20 years more? How can we embody that in the virtual, so when people come into interacting with Burning Man as an event in the virtual space, they're actually interacting with these principle sets through relating with us in the virtual space. So I think that's one way, in terms of like, when we talk about ontology, it's like we show up in these virtual space and we embody these practices and these principles and we be it, and other people can meet us and connect with us and get to engage with that. I think that's a very powerful and a very unique opportunity that's happening right now in this week for Burning Man. So I'm pretty excited by that, and glad to be like having these conversations in the virtual.
I think another thing, just rooting what Damian's just spoken to into the complexities of the current world that we're all part of. Some of the qualities of being that I love so much about Burning Man is this quality of not knowing necessarily what's next, and also embracing the strange and imperfect. I can't tell you how many times I've kind of come up to a space where there's a performance or a workshop, and it's either something incredibly calculated and amazing, or someone who's just trying it out, or they've like decided to stand on the stage and now they're performing, and it's just this opportunity to just not be as attached to perfection, and also to just be really fun and curious. And I think right now, one of the things that most resonates with the world and the future that we're getting to design into is iteration. One of the most beautiful qualities and lessons that design gets to give us is iteration, and being open to trying and testing and trying and testing, but not necessarily being so attached to perfection that there isn't room for the journey to be the destination. And so there's this thread that kind of brings us through this quality of being that Burning Man so lovingly gifts us, and how that actually relates to the way that we're showing up and innovating in the world that is currently, because of the state of so many shifting tides and systems, so very it's beckoning this curiosity and kind of begging an approach that requires rapid iteration and experimentation If not, we'll break, right? Because we can't say that we know how to navigate these waters, but we can say that we're curious, and we can say that we give a fuck, and we can say that we're going to try. And so it's a really beautiful segue, I think, for a quality of being that can help us navigate together collectively.
So we take it out in the world, right? And we have been for years, I remember when I was first coming into Burning Man, and for years I was asking like, well, what is it like? And my friends would come back and it was kind of this like, I can't really describe what it is. And I was always fascinated. So we have a dear friend who I'm going to read a quote from that actually it's kind of a mashup quote. It's between a really incredible philosopher named Eric Davis. He's also a technologist and just flat out genius. And then our friend Jason Silva kind of encompassed how Eric Davis wrote about Burning Man in his article called Beyond Burning Man. And they referred to it as, they said this place is unobstructed dream space, a supermarket of memes, a juxtaposition of pocket universes, and a demolition derby of reality constructs colliding on a parched void, the effect of which is the collision between mind and such enrapturing novelty that you get hurled into ecstatic mind spaces that are so novel that it heals you of your fractures. The dance with the ecstatic cleanses us of our suffering. And I think that for me, when I heard that, it was the first time that I heard Burning Man described where I was like, oh, that is what I felt. What is that? Can we design for that? And I think last year, we had a really beautiful exploration on a couple projects that we don't need to refer to now, but we had an exploration of what it meant to essentially go out and practice the design process of bringing these little pocket universes together. And I would love to talk about what kind of areas of creation and the creative process are beneficial to the Burning Man culture moving in to the world, and how do we create spaces, theaters of mind, both physical and digital, that can help bring this culture forward into the world more. What is the one thing that when you think about your time at Burning Man and then you move into the world, and I'll ask Damian, what is the one thing that you are taking from that and then going into put into your work in the world?
Yeah, I think the one thing for me that Burning Man has taught me is co-creation. Co-creation is like a very, very interesting aspect of the collaborative process. We talk about collaboration, but I think co-creation goes much further to say that we're on, sort of like equal footing, equal standing. And what is involved in co-creation is, to what Roxy was saying, is this not knowing and embracing the not knowing and allowing for emergent, to the point where at the end of whatever idea or solution or whatever is created, it's kind of like, who came up with that? Like, what is that? There's no clear answer because it was such a co-created process. So I think one of the things that Burning Man has taught me, and I've always like looked at, is how you have like, thousands of artists coming together and co-creating this experience for about 80,000 people, because that is ultimately what's happening. And so what Burning Man as an organization does is it creates the scaffolding, it creates the rail guards for the creators to come in and build upon, and co-create upon. And I sort of like look at the values in that co-creation, such as like, there's also like participation, right? Like everyone's just like radically involved in the co-creation process of this massive event. And no one's trying to own anything, but at the same time, everyone has ownership over the culture that is being created because of that participation, because of that co-creation. And so for me, it's very interesting how these value sets and these principles of like participation and co-creation sort of like come together and allow us to create something so beautiful. So what I think about and what I wonder about is, how do we bring that into our creative process? How do we bring that into our everyday of creating things, where we're not trying to create to own, but co-create to have a collective experience for everyone involved. So I think like that's one of the biggest teaching and the biggest practices that I've been learning from Burning Man over the year. And when I say Burning Man, I'm talking about like the experience itself, going in with like thousands of creators and artists and producers, and just seeing them doing this and going like, wow. The, and there's such like a beautiful chaos in all of it because of that not knowing. And there's so much chaos, even to like when we're doing just sort of like the setup and the production for today, right? There's a whole not knowing, and there's like chaos, but then there's like a practice of trusting the process and trusting that it'll all come together, it'll be what it needs to be, and it'll be beautiful. And that is what we call magic. And humans love to experience magic. So I wish we would create more like that. And that's my practice. That's what I learned from Burning Man.
The root of magic. As we imagine, so it becomes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Roxy, I was, sitting here going, man, I really wish we had somebody on this call that understood that scaffolding underneath the creative process. I just feel like we should expand on that a little bit and maybe talk about that.
I wonder who could talk about that.
I don't know. Well, I think scaffolding on the creative process as related to Burning Man, slightly different question than that, which is, what I bring into the world from Burning Man, but maybe I'll try to connect the two. So it feels like, as I'm hearing you speak, Damian, and also just listening to the snippet of the conversation from Jason and what was that other guy's name?
Eric.
Yeah.
I remember I've listened to that audio before. I'm having all of these like very visceral memories of experiences at Burning Man, and helping build temples or art projects or camps, and being a part of this collective co-creative process. And one of the things that kept coming to mind for me, and I'll segue into scaffolding for creativity, but is a little less flowery. I think Burning Man, this like radical self-reliance that it beckons of you, and then when you're out there at a certain point, you're like, did I just spend $1,500 to stand in the middle of a dust storm and get my wind knocked out of me and be completely demolished and exhausted? But then the answer is yeah, that's actually that's what I did. I came and pushed to come and build maybe a dome that flipped over because we did it incorrectly, or maybe an incredible space that became one of the only safe havens for 30 people to hide out from a dust storm for 6 hours. And it's weathering, I think, Burning Man kind of, so it depends on the year, depends on the day, but it makes you fight for that which you believe in, and it creates the conditions for you to continue to show up. And so when you get to have those moments of co-creation and magic, when you get to have the calm in the storm and the sunrise over a piece of art you didn't even know existed, 2 blocks from you with 3 of your new best friends, you earned it. You earned it because you decided to stick it out because of whatever your reasons are. For me personally, I am so inspired by art and what creating these containers together can do. And at the end of the day, maybe the container itself was the point, but the lesson actually came from the process of making. And it comes back to this journey is the destination. And I think that comes back around to our creative process too, right? A lot of times when creators of all kinds are in the process of making, it comes from our inspiration. It comes from what we hope to see, what we hope our impact will be in the world, or just because the feeling of doing it helps bring us solace in the storm. And one of those deepest lessons from Burning Man is for me is really like to work for it, and part of the creative scaffolding is that we got to get clear on what we're working for. We got to get clear on what we're working for. And also when we're creating together, we got to get clear on what aligns with what we're working towards together. And that helps create coherence and something bigger than ourselves to work towards. And in that process of working towards something, working for something together at Burning Man and beyond, it also invites us to the magic that happens at Burning Man. I think there's often a story that I hear about synchronicities and cause and effects that people would have never realized or thought possible that they experienced at Burning Man. But it allows for them to consider their effect and the effect of others on part of their experience and part of the collective experience. And so if we can take some of this consideration of our effect on ourselves and on the systems that we're a part of as part of our creative scaffolding for the way that we're designing for that which we believe in the world, and take that consideration and zooming out, which is a regenerative design principle. It invites us to be more considerate human beings and understand the greater systems that we're a part of. And through that process, to also reconsider the way that we're hoping to bring about an effect, because it's not just us. And so we get to do that with each other for this greater cause, and we get to see what is the gap between who we are and who we need to be in order to do that together, and that becomes an opportunity. And in real time, in real life at Burning Man, we sort that shit out. We figure out how to make that happen, and we don't have to do it alone.
What if we don't know what we're working for? I remember going out to the first year of Burning Man, and I went for Build Week. I was out there for like 6 days, just in the heat and the sun and building. And there were points in that first few days where I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what are we actually doing here? But then you get then you make it through the eye of the needle, right? And you're in the city that you just built. And I was always fascinated with like, well, why did I need to know? Like, shouldn't I have just trusted that was probably going to happen, that it was going to be way more than I could have ever imagined? But sometimes we have this feeling of knowing. And I think one of the things that, if we can invite in, for anybody that's listening, it's like, we don't know a lot. Like we're not going to know a lot. And at the same time, there are things that some of us know that are going on that could, when the information is presented to other people, create a playground or a place for people to co-create inside of. I wanted to shift a little bit into place and what's really happening as Burning Man kind of goes out into the world from a physical standpoint. I think everybody has had that experience as we're departing Burning Man and we're going, wow, like we should just never go home, or we should never go back, right? This should be our home. We should stay in this. And now with the kind of rapid onset of large-scale systems change across the world, we're watching camps that are normally just gathering for a week at a time, looking at land, looking at large-scale community developments, looking at how do they create their little universe of their camp or their culture inside of some physical location that is more permanent or everlasting. And so I'm really interested in how these spaces are coming online, and I would love to talk about like what's exciting for you guys in the kind of space of physical location and how our cultures move into physical locations. And if we get tail into the fly conversation, I think it might be cool to talk about what Burning Man is actually doing a bit in that accord. But I think first, let's just talk about a bit about what's happening with physical space and where we're going.
Do you want to start, Seth? I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, I want to hear you, Seth.
You're muted, though.
You're muted.
I'm unmuted. So, You know, I feel very blessed that amidst the communities that I've been able to meet at Burning Man and then travel through outside of Burning Man, that I get to see some of the most unique physical locations coming online all around the world. And also get to play steward to one of the more special ones that we have here in California. And so in the location that we're currently in, we're in the process of developing a culture and an operational system and a sustainability model that allows for a community of people to hold physical place together, to have some kind of collective output together, and to see if that process on that physical space can sustain that community. Now, we don't have people living on land. There's a few of us, but not many. Now, other communities around the world have large-scale housing developments and different ways in which they're scaling out how they live together. I was always fascinated with the kibbutz in Israel, and how they had kind of an output that allowed for their model of living to be sustainable. So whether you liked making blue jeans or not, if the kibbutz decided their output was blue jeans, then showing up to the blue jean factory for 2 days out of the week or 3 days out of the week allowed for you to have what you needed to survive with your community or to live with your community, from your house to your cars to your food, etc. I'm really fascinated with these models, but one of the things that I find is that within Burning Man culture, we love to move community to community. And when we do that, and we have certain gifts that we've offered one community, and then we go to try to transfer those gifts to another community to begin working with them, well, that previous community had a long time to actually process what we were creating with them and our talents and where our disciplines fit that process. But when we go to another community, if the language set around what's being done isn't shared, then we kind of have a breakdown in the way that humans are moving community to community and able to support each other. So for me, and Roxy, I would love you to expand on this. I think language around how we're moving as communities in the world and what we're doing to share our systems, to share our creative processes, to share our development processes, to share design processes. Like, how do we actually create a distributed and open sourced information ecology that allows for people to access a creative process or a community development process that we can all understand and that we can all move through, in the same way that, like, if you're a line producer in Hollywood or an actor and you're brought in by an agency into a studio to work on something to make a film, you know that process. Whether you're working at Sony Pictures or Netflix, if you are serving that role, they know how to share that talent. And we right now, what I see is that we actually don't have a great process around sharing talent across our communities, especially within the Burning Man culture. And I don't think it's that we don't want to. I think it's a breakdown in language, and it's a breakdown in system interoperability. And so for me, I'm really excited to bring a lot of these systems online that can help a lot of these places communicate with each other. But I'm still wondering, is there a language set that is needed, or is this just something that is going to kind of slowly come online and we find our way? Roxy, you spent about half of last year working to develop essentially a language set around a production process in experiential design, where we could communicate to large bodies of experiential designers what the process was by which they could move through the design process within experiential. And having that language set and being able to open source that to a group of people allowed for us to watch people moving through the same process, and the output completely shifted. Our speed at which we had the output completely shifted. I want you to expand on that, because right now, how do we get these tools to people? How do we get these ideas? And then how do we link all of this together?
Great questions. The immediate thing that comes to mind has to do with culture, right? Like, I think being born and raised in America, one thing that I think, well, Seth, you were born and raised here. Damian, you were not, but you have been here the last 10 years. One thing that we've seen here and also globally is a bit of an obsession with scaling, right? We're like more, better, faster, stronger. And not all communities, as you referenced, Seth, can use the same language. They can't use the same scaling methods. But one of the innovations in looking at the way that we approach sharing, and this sort of open source movement has given us this gift as well, is around modularity. And this is also a lesson that's embedded in Burning Man art and Burning Man culture. Like when art at Burning Man is built modularly, then you can get it back into a city and you can switch out some of the cheaper parts for parts that are going to work and last in a city for, you know, a few years for a public installation. But when it's not, then often it ends up in a trash pile. And that is very similar in reference to how we can interoperate between communities, between different data sets and different tool sets. And it's kind of, another thing that comes to mind is kind of the what, right? The what are we sharing in this language barrier that you're talking about, Seth? Something else to point to help clarify this is remembering in culture how this consideration of where we're coming from kind of puts us in a perspective where we see the world from a different place. And so there's two worlds colliding in this process of modularity, but also reacculturation and onboarding, which gets to be a bit of a iteration. It's like another iterative space that meets in the middle between how do we create language that is accessible, but that also in principle helps guide a way of being and helps to simplify and refine based on best practices in testing.
I think that's exactly what I was, you know, and thank you for calling my language forth and also creating clarity, because it's not about the communities themselves scaling out. It's about the innovations that those communities have being able to be shared.
Right. Yeah. And then it becomes some of it's mapping, right? We have all the tools for all the wrong reasons. We have all the things that we could actually probably need, and we just need to repurpose. And there's, because of our obsession with scale, often there's not as much of a culture of refinement. And so one thing that the pandemic has given us an opportunity to do is refine that which we have been developing so that we can actually share it in a way that is useful to our global communities and to share between each other, because we're not so busy building more. We're like, what do we got? What do we got on our tool belt? And how can it actually help? And so the more that we can actually see what we have, refine it and shift it, and then not be so attached to ownership. Right? Again, coming back to Burning Man and the key principles, one of them, I think the decommodification principle, you can look at it in a lot of ways. Some people are like, oh, it's just about not putting your brand on things. And some people would say, oh, well, it's actually just not about needing to own things and having to say that this is mine. But you know, there's another layer where it's not just either of those things, but it's both and then some. It's the fact that, you know, if we want to evolve into the future that we know is possible, then we need to get real good at sharing, but also giving quick iterative feedback and refining that which we're creating so that we're not having 10 communities that are all trying to reinvent the same wheel. We have a few communities that have overlapping skills, and those can be a way that we build capacity whenever we have new opportunities, and some that are just really good at some specific things. And there's a way to empower them to do those things and know that together in the system of communities and of culture that we're actually stronger together. And Burning Man is a beautiful model of how this actually works out in physical space as a metaphor for how we can bring that into the world and the way that we relate in our world all of the time. But the way that happens at Burning Man is because we, at least with our small local communities, generally speaking, we kind of know who's around us in our camps as a micro of our macro. We kind of know who the like electrician dope person is, and these like 3 carpenters and the fluffers, and we're like, great, awesome. We're not going to need, I don't need to be the electrician and the fluffer and the carpenter. We got one of those over there. We got, and the same thing is true when you zoom out to like a few different camps in the city. And then all of a sudden we're in this global pandemic and we're stuck in our different countries and our different communities. But that doesn't mean that our resources and our resourcing and our ability to scaffold our creative capacity together isn't just as relevant. It's just a process of seeing, acknowledging, understanding, and empowering each other. Those are some thoughts anyways.
Damian, you have anything to add to that?
Beautiful. I'm really resonate with a lot. I think some of the things that came to mind is the scaling aspect of, it's really true that when we create something successful in terms of like a space or an event or an experience, the idea is to scale it. And I always explore with this concept of scaling. In fact, it's an inquiry that I'm currently in. And how I think about scaling is that there's scaling horizontally, which is what we tend to do. And horizontal is like the numbers. And then there's scaling in terms of vertically, which for me, that means the frequency in how we practice, how we do something. So if we're creating an experience, instead of scaling it horizontally, we can seek to scale it, vertically, because with spaces, for spaces to work, intimacy is required. And so when we start to scale it, we start to move away from intimacy. And that's one of the key ingredients of connection, I feel like, which is the point of these sort of like social spaces for community or for gathering, and for practicing new behaviors that can make us come into better relationship with each other and the spaces. So I think we definitely ought to be thinking about different ways of scaling, which for right now, I think we're looking at scaling in one possible way, and that's what we do with everything. We scale horizontally. And I think that's had like a detrimental effect on our planet, and it's had a detrimental effect on our way of being in the world with each other and ourselves. So I think that's a word just like stands out to me as you bring it up, Roxy, that we should all be in inquiry about how we scale what we create, because scaling is not necessarily the the end point of success. It's not the definition of success, I think. So that's the part that I wanted to add when you bring that up, Roxy.
Perfect double tap. Damian, you had one of the more beautiful kind of theses around a project plan that I had ever come across. And it was when you were working on the platform that we're actually sitting on right now, that's holding a lot of the multiverse and the on-ramp for the multiverse. Your hypothesis for building this kind of platform was that experiences, these shared experiences or shared moments in time, are really what fire off a community. And it's the pulse and the repetition within those experiences that creates the coherence within the community. And so as you talk about that horizontal, I think the horizontal versus vertical scaling is powerful. And I would love you to expand a bit upon like the process of sharing the experiences repeatedly, and why it's important and why you're focused on it so much right now.
Yeah, I came across it creating experiences when I was in San Francisco, and what I experimented with a lot of time when events or experiences are created, we would do it for existing communities. What I experimented with is how do you bring like 30 people who don't know each other into a room, and then you get them onto the same wavelength and get them to feel connected in a meaningful way to each other. And what I realize is that the idea of giving people any relationship that you have is based on shared experiences. So we talk about family and we're connected to family, we're close to family. But if if I took you from a young age and you grew up with a completely different group of people, that would be your family. And why is that? Because you have shared experiences with those individuals, and that's what facilitates, cultivates, and creates that deep sense of connection. So what I think about a lot when it comes to experiences and this platform that I'm creating is, how do we create shared experiences in a short space of time to create connection with people? And so what I would do, and what I realized, and going back to like, this idea of what Burning Man is, art is an experience. And so what I would do is stack a series of art into a period of time and have people move through space and time experiencing those art. And as they move through and they experience the art, it turns out that you can have people have a deep sense of connection just by having shared experience of the art. And that for me was really epic. And so what I thought is like, okay, great, this is really cool. How do I scale that? And that's where the concept of vertical versus horizontal comes in, because the idea is not to scale it, and have more people come to the experience, but it's actually to repeat the experience so so people can have more and more shared experience, thus deepening the connection. And so if that can be figured out and that can be scaled in a meaningful way, I feel like that's ultimately what I'm exploring. That's the thesis that I'm in. And there's a quote that I wanted to share, but like when we talk about art, because what is Burning Man and what it does really well. Pablo Picasso said, art washes from the soul the dust of everyday life. And you think about Burning Man in the desert and it's dust. And you have art in the dust, right? And so it's just like this really beautiful way to look at it, where you're in the desert, you're covered with dust, you're experiencing art. And I feel that's why people have this sort of like perspective of like coming back, like this is home and coming back to the real world, because the art is washing the dust of everyday life from our soul, and it brings us back into connection with ourselves. So that's why when I approach experiences and when I talk about scaling and scaling for frequency, it's about bringing people into connection with art as often, as frequently as possible, because art has the power to bring us back into ourselves. And ultimately, that's what we need to be doing, coming back into ourselves. And so when we come back into ourselves and we can connect with ourselves, then we can connect to each other in a more deeper and profounder ways. We can expand the spectrum of connection with each other. And then when we start expanding the connection with each other, then we can expand the connection with nature. And so art for me is one of the most powerful tools to bring us into shared experiences, which brings us into connection. Thanks for asking about that.
Roxy, I would love to, and thank you for that, Damian. Roxy, I would love to pose to you a question about the next 10 years. I actually just when I said that, I actually just had like my whole body just got kind of, I don't know if it was goosebumps of excitement or fear. It was my whole body just kind of like rippled there. And I'm really wondering what it looks like to work together for the next 10 years. And I want to kind of reference that Roxy's been working on something incredibly special via the legacy of Buckminster Fuller. And Bucky used to talk about a period of time in the early 21st century where humanity would kind of unlock its potential to understand how to solve complex problems together. And it would be a shift in a process of thought. Referred to it as whether we call it critical thinking or design thinking. It's essentially the ability to get out in front of us 5 to 10 years, see the complexities and reverse engineer back to square one and start solving. And so really beautifully last year, at the beginning of last year, actually at the beginning of this year, the Buckminster Fuller Institute actually launched the Design Science Decade. And Roxy and a beautiful team of creators have been stewarding a cohort of other creators, multidisciplinary creators, to work on this future vision and future story of what the next 10 years can look like. And I've had a front row seat to the process. And first of all, I just want to tip my hat. Like, I was on a call this morning with this group and teared up at least 3 or 4 times as we're talking about what we get to create together. And so I would love you to expand on, like, you know, we have 3-4 minutes left, and then Mr. Breedlove is going to come on and make some announcements. And so I would love for you, Roxy, to maybe close us out with the what's the hope for the next 10 years?
What's the hope? One of the gifts that we get to acknowledge that we're given through the technology of design is that we can look at where we hope to be and where we know that we can be in a space where all life is thriving, in a world that works for all life, not just humans, not just some humans, but truly being in a future where we are rejoicing in true circularity and regeneration, and knowing that that is part of our true nature, and that our systems are full of this potential and they're ripe with helping that potential be fully tapped. But that vision will remain a vision unless we take the gift of design into our hands and say, how do we plan and get there? How do we take the steps that we need to actually iterate and put plans into effect to shift the systems, the ways that we behave, the ways that we relate, both with our natural world, with ourselves, and with each other, so that we can actually get there. And the project that Seth is referring to is one part of a greater movement towards planetary and cultural regeneration. It's uplifting creators as a keystone species to help to have all creators, and I know that if you're watching this, you have the capacity in your hands to create. You create every day in your own ways. And there are many people who relate to themselves as creators specifically. And they, you know, there's this power of translation that is needing to be given more support. And in order for us to be able to articulate this transition to a future that works for all life, we're working to really empower and uplift creators to have the tools that they need to understand the complexity at hand and the steps that can and need to be taken to be able to help move those visions into the future, away from an idea and into our mind's eye and into the public, so that we can actually take these steps together and to plan into that future together. If we can see it, we can do it. There's this, as we look backwards, you know, think back into kind of retro futurism as an example. Back before we ever thought that we would have computers, and there were hovering cars, and before there were planes, you know, there were these beautiful visions of a speculative potential future that a lot of people said, this isn't possible. There's no technology to do this. But those visions actually led to innovation that led to a lot of that now being in action and impossible. And so if we can't take the time to visualize it and to see what innovations can be driven towards, then we won't get there. But the next 10 years is an important and finite time frame that we have the opportunity to actually lean into and create into. And there are more than enough people on this planet who care, and there are so many pathways that are now having the visibility. We're making the invisible visible now, so that we can actually put these things into motion and get there together. And it's not a very calming or happy thing to think about whenever you think into the fact that if we don't lean into this, at the end of this 10 years, we are in a tipping point where, and we already are, there's a lot of life that can't rebound, but we do have the gift right now that life can rebound, and that there is a way to regenerate our planet, but not without regenerating our culture. So the gift starts with us, and the way that we regenerate ourselves, and the way we relate with each other, and the way that we relate with our communities and our governments, and all of the systems that support our ecologies, and everything that seems separate is actually interconnected and interrelated. And the more that we can illuminate those interconnectedness and see ourselves as a part of a greater system and regenerate that vision, we'll get there. And we're not giving up. We got this. So let's create it.
Try harden ourselves up to the ones who died. Look in my eyes. Tell me the cost of the life that we're living.